And now we're looking at great lessons from the book of Mark. And be aware that there are 4 accounts of the life of Christ: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. You may call them the 4 Gospels. I don't believe that's the most accurate way, because the Bible teaches in the New Testament there is but one gospel, and that's Galatians 1, 6 through 9. However, if you talk about the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of John, I don't believe you'll lose your soul over that, but I don't believe that's the most effective, most accurate way to express those ideas. So what do you call them? 4 accounts of the life of Christ. Matthew was written seemingly to help convince the Jews that Jesus of Nazareth is the Christ, the Son of God. How did he do that? He portrayed Jesus to be the King of the kingdom, and also by more than 60 Old Testament references showing that Jesus of Nazareth is the fulfillment of those Old Testament passages. Luke seemingly was written to the Greeks. Why? Because they were looking for the perfect or complete man. Hence, Luke portrays Jesus to be the perfect or complete man, the Son of Man, to help the Greeks understand that it is Jesus of Nazareth who is the perfect or complete man. John is more universal in scope, in that he establishes Jesus of Nazareth to be the Son of God. He did that by 2 main, we may say, methods: the 7 I am statements indicative of Jesus' divine nature, and then the 7 primary miracles indicative of Jesus' divine power. Now we're looking at Mark, and Mark shows Jesus to be the straightway servant. It was probably helped to convince the Romans, those of the Roman Empire, to believe that Jesus of Nazareth is the Christ. He's always going, he's always working. And if we had to try and summarize Mark in one verse, it would probably be Mark 10:45. For the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. So we're looking at some great lessons now, and they're all going to be tied in with Jesus. And last time we talked about his personality, and this time another great lesson from the book of Mark would be proof, that is, of Jesus' claims and Jesus' fulfillments of Old Testament Scripture. Now, people were astonished at the teaching of Jesus, Mark 1 and verse 22. And Jesus' ministry was not limited to mere words. He proved his claims by means of miracles. Let's begin today in Mark chapter 2. And if someone would read Mark 2, verses 1 through 12 out loud for us. Good, thank you. How about that? You know, the key really to that whole section is verse number 9. Which one do you think is easier to do? You think it's easier to look at a man and say your sins are forgiven, or do you think it's easier to say, arise, take up your mat, and walk home? He proved it. So Mark helps us see that Jesus' ministry was not limited to just what he said. It also includes what he did. And what he did helped prove and establish what he said. Notice how the book of Mark begins. Someone read Mark 1, verses 2 and 3 out loud for us. Verses 2 and 3 would be good. All right, good. Thank you. So what do we see here? We see that the New Testament helps us to understand and, in fact, explains to us the meaning of many Old Testament passages. So we might say, what was Malachi 3:1 about? What was Isaiah 40 and verse 3 about? When we read the book of Mark, we're going to see that a lot of what God had in his mind, even in the Old Testament, was fulfilled in Jesus of Nazareth. So, great lesson that we see is proof. The third great lesson that we may want to notice from the book of Mark would be that of parables. Parables were a great method of teaching. Now, Jesus was not the first, nor was he the only one in the history of the world to teach and embalm the truth in the hearts of men by means of parables. You may want to go back to Numbers, chapters 23 and 24. You may want to note Job, chapters 26 through 29. You may want to note Ezekiel 17 and other places. So Jesus was not the first, nor was he the only one to speak by means of parables. However, he probably was the one who popularized them the most. Now, what were parables? The technical definition of a parable is the casting of one thing to the side of another for the purpose of comparison, but nobody ever remembers that. So the general practical definition that we've come up with is an earthly account with a deeper, richer, spiritual, heavenly meaning. It's true on both sides. So two of the main purposes of parables were to reveal the truth to the honest and good heart, but parables also could conceal the truth from those who didn't care anything about it. Well, let's notice the text of Mark 12, verses 1 through 12. Someone, if you would, read that section of Scripture out loud for us. Good, thank you. How about that? How about that? Sometimes we might think that Jesus was reserved or not bold in his preaching. There never was probably a bolder preacher than Jesus. Now, he laid that out in parabolic form, earthly account, but a deeper, richer, spiritual, heavenly meaning. But did they understand it? Yeah, how did they feel about it when they understood it? Did they like it? They say, hey, appreciate you saying that. Can you give us one more just to make it plain? How did they react? They wanted that man dead. Why? They figured out he is preaching against us, and we ain't having it. And you know what he really did is give them a scope of Old Testament history. If you see somebody's name in the Bible Isaiah, Jeremiah, and whatnot, do you realize how those people were treated? Have you stopped to think about that? Right there. Jesus is summarizing how they were treated. How did, by and large, their own people treat them? Called him, beat him, sent him away empty, sent another servant. At him they cast stones, verse number 4, wounded him in the head, sent him away shamefully handled. By the way, this is how God's people treated God's prophets. Don't forget that. This is not necessarily how the heathen treated Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and so forth. This is how God's people treated him. So God says, I got it. I'm going to send my son. Who's that? How are they going to treat Jesus? You know what inflames them even worse is he told them what they were going to do and they still did it. That's what makes people mad sometimes. You tell them exactly what's happened, and it's right. You tell them what's going on now, and it's right. And you say, based off the evidence, here's what's going to happen. Now, we're not inspired like Jesus, but Jesus knew what was going to happen. Parables are a great, great method of teaching, even to this day. So we don't need to try and invent new parables. Let's preach the ones in the Bible. Why? People haven't changed. People really haven't changed. The next great lesson from the book of Mark would be that of preaching. That is, Jesus' powerful proclamations. And indeed, Jesus is the great heart knower, Mark 2 and verse 8. Doesn't it stand to reason that if anyone understands the value of the soul, wouldn't it be the one who made the soul? Mark 8 verses 36 and 37. Preaching, that is, gospel preaching, is always designed to help, never to hinder, though some are going to be too immature, some are going to be too stubborn, some are going to be too enslaved to sin to understand and appreciate the power of gospel preaching. And if they misunderstood Jesus, what's going to happen to us? If they didn't understand him, or they understood him just fine and got enraged at him, what's going to happen to us? You think somehow we're just going to be A1, everybody's going to stand up in line, wait and say, yes, we'll just fill up these front rows and just wait our turn to become a... That doesn't generally happen, does it? Now let's notice some text here in Mark. Someone, if you would, read Mark 4, verses 10 to 12 out loud for us. Good. Thank you. What do you notice there? This is right in the midst of what we may know as the parable of the sower. And somehow, we always want to turn things around on the sower of the seed and blame him. Is that how Jesus did things? But the problem must be with the way that the preacher is proclaiming the message, right? Very rarely will we slow down and say, what condition is my heart in today? Am I prepared when I came into this Bible class? Have I tilled the soil of my heart? Have I broken up my fallow ground? That's Bible language, by the way. Have I done my necessary work to have the soil of my heart ready to receive with meekness the engrafted or the implanted word, which is able to save your souls, according to James 1, right? But we think the problem is always with the seed slinger. Is it? Is it? Now, we're not trying to act like there couldn't be a problem, but is it always the preacher? If so, then Jesus was the problem. Who believes that? Who believes that? Surely nobody that reads the Bible with an open heart. So sometimes what can be the problem? The problem is the soil. The soil has not prepared itself. The mind of any given individual may not be ready to receive the seed as it's being broadcast, right? And sometimes, no matter what, Some people just have hard hearts, don't they? Some people may have shallow soil. Some people may have the choked soil. The seed takes root among the thorns, but what happens? They don't weed out the thorns. And what happens? The thorns, the weeds overtake it. Got a flower bed? Got a garden? Do nothing and watch what happens. What happens? Inevitably, do nothing and what happens? The weeds will overtake it. Do you see a spiritual lesson there? Is there something that we could sink our teeth into and realize that we have some work to do in our own lives? Notice also Mark chapter 11. Someone read Mark 11 verses 27 to 33. 27 to 33, out loud. Mark 11, 27 through 33. Good, thank you. How about that? Had Jesus made it plain? I mean, had it been made plain? If we didn't have anything in the Bible but Mark 2, 1 to 12, that's plain, right? And then some people, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, they're always going to say, yeah, but. Yeah, but. Yeah, but. And then there has to come a point where Jesus, and what did Jesus do here? Okay, let's play the question game. You want to play the question game? Here's a question. The baptism of John. Tell me about it. You got two choices, and Jesus was right. Either John did that on his own, or he did what God told him to do. Pick your poison. Because Jesus is the great heart knower. He knew they hadn't submitted to John's baptism. You look at Luke 7, 28 to 30, you'll see. They rejected the counsel of God, being not baptized of John. So they knew that there's what John had done, there's what John had said, and it boils down to a matter of authority, just like Jesus. Jesus had done what he had done, he had said what he said. Well, where did he get his authority to do those things? The simple answer is the correct one. And it was just as plain with Jesus, probably plainer with Jesus than it was with John the Baptist. But you see, what preaching does is it puts people in the gap. There's what I don't want to admit, but then there's what I can't deny. I don't want to admit Mark 16:16, for example, but I can't deny that's exactly what it says. Do you see? That's what preaching does. It puts us in a position where we have to say, okay, there's the way I've lived, there's what I've thought, but here's what God has to say about it. What am I going to do? I'll tell you what always happens? Reasoning. We bounce these things around in our mind, just like these guys did. And you know what they did? They lied. We cannot tell. That's a lie. They could tell. They didn't aim to tell. And you know what people do today? They leave. They go somewhere else. You know, you read about that in 2 Timothy 4. They shall heap to themselves teachers having what? Itching ears. Especially in today's world, if you don't like what somebody says, all you have to do is just keep hunting until you find somebody that says exactly what you want said, exactly the way you want it said. But does that make it true? Jesus is the master teacher. He's the greatest preacher who ever lived, and not everybody submitted to and accepted the things that came out of his mouth. Is there a lesson there for us today? We need not be shocked or surprised when people get upset. People leave, people lie perhaps. I mean, that's what people do. The next great lesson from the book of Mark, number 5, would be passion. That is, this allows us to see the heart, the true intent or motive of Jesus. Now, reading the book of Mark out loud should take no more than 2 hours. I do hesitate somewhat to say this, but I checked. I read the book of Mark out loud yesterday in 1 hour and 8 minutes, King James Version, which everybody knows that's the hardest version that ever was, is, or could be. Nobody talks like that anymore. I did it in 1 hour and 8 minutes on the clock. Now, I'll tell you how I do things. I read 3 or 4 chapters and I say, pause, I'm going to take a break. I got to get up and move. Okay? So on the clock time, it shouldn't take any more than 2 hours, and you could probably do it in a good bit less than that. But even in that short span of time, everyone with an honest and good heart should be able to see what motivated Jesus. And Jesus was always motivated by genuine, sincere, and real love. Let's look at Mark 8 and verse 31. Notice the text of Mark 8:31. The text there says, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man, who's that? That seems to be Jesus' favorite term to refer to himself. It indicates his flawless humanity. But he's not just the Son of Man, he's also the Son of God. But as Jesus tried to refer to himself to people, it seems that the reason he did that is say, I'm in the boat with you, I'm a human. He is 100% human, but he's also 100% God. That's how he's the only begotten. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. How would your attitude be if you knew that was going to happen to you? If you knew, this is not what Jesus had a strong inclination that this might happen. He knew this is what was going to happen. And yet, as we read through just the text of Mark, he's always going. He didn't allow discouragement, perhaps, or the fact that everybody didn't just accept him to say, I'm going home. I'm going to quit. They don't like me. Okay. They may not. But what about the others? There's always somebody that's going to be willing to listen. Move forward to Mark 10. Notice Mark 10, verses 32, 34. The text says, and they were in the way going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus went before them, and they were amazed. And as they followed, they were afraid. And he took again the 12 and began to tell them what things should happen unto him, saying, Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be delivered unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles, and they shall mock him, and shall scourge him, and shall spit upon him, and shall kill him. And the 3rd day he shall rise again. If you knew that was true of you, how would you act? Do you say, let's go preach the gospel to these people so that in a period of time they're going to spit on me? They're going to condemn me to death as an innocent. How would you react? I'm going to tell you, I'd have a real hard time with that. If I thought I was coming up here and when I got down y'all were going to spit in my face, I don't even real sure I'd get up here. Sorry, but I'm telling you, would you? If you thought there was any reasonable doubt that because you sat in that pew, I'm going to come down there and spit in your face and smack you, would you be here? It's something to think about. Something to think about, isn't it? Because was Jesus right about this? He's dead on the money. But how did he treat people? How did he treat them? Seems to be, doesn't it? Go to Mark 15. Look at verse 22 beginning. They bring him unto the place Golgotha. Now, if you call that Golgotha, that's fine, but that's probably not how you say that word. It's probably Golgotha, which is being interpreted the place of a skull. Okay? Golgotha seems to be the Hebrew term for this place. Do you remember what the other one was in Latin? It's a little bit more palatable to us. Calvary. So Calvary in Latin is the same as Golgotha in Hebrew. Same place, but 2 different languages and 2 totally different words, but to describe the same place. Both those words basically mean what? Place of a skull. Evidently, that's kind of, at least from a distance, what it looked like to some extent. And they gave him to drink wine mingled with myrrh, but he received it not. And when they had crucified him, they parted his garments, casting lots upon them what every man should take. And it was the third hour, probably most of the time, especially in the New Testament. When you see that third hour, it's probably accounting it by Jewish time. And that would be the third hour of the day, so it would be 9 a.m. And they crucified him. They drove nails through his hands and feet. This is after he had been scourged. Crown of thorns shoved into his head, stripped, beaten. I mean, just terrible. Now, if you knew this was going to happen to you, how would you have behaved toward people? That's a little bit more challenging to think about and try and be fair and straight up with, because, I don't think any of us have the threat of being whipped or spit on or anything here, but sometimes we're pretty rotten anyway. Right? I mean, we're just pretty rotten. Well, Jesus knew all this was going to happen. Not everybody had thought he was the greatest thing ever throughout his public ministry, so it wasn't like everybody just lined up. Now, they'd line up to eat, wouldn't they? They'd line up to have a miracle. When it came down to standing up for Jesus, not too many did that. But notice chapter 16, verse 1 beginning. And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, now if you call her Magdalene, that's fine, but it's probably not how you say that word. And Mary, the mother of James and Salome, had bought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came unto the sepulchre at the rising of the sun, and they said among themselves, Who shall roll us away the stone from the door of the sepulchre? Verse 4. And when they looked, they saw that the stone was rolled away, for it was very great. And entering into the sepulchre, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a long white garment, and they were affrighted. And he saith unto them, Be not affrighted. Ye seek Jesus of Nazareth, which was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold the place where they laid him. Do you see the passion of Jesus? Now, what's the point I want to try to make? Could it be that Jesus understood the big picture? That he understood, there's going to be some difficulties, and it's going to include them spitting on me, them mocking me, them killing me. But ultimately, I'm going to get right back up. And I'm going to send body, soul, and spirit up to the right hand of the Father, and they ain't going to be able to touch me ever again. So what lesson could we learn from this? Perhaps when we need something to help improve our attitudes, we need to think bigger. This life is not all there is. There's something bigger and better that awaits the faithful. But we do have to get through on this side. And we have to get through faithful, how long? Unto death. We don't get to quit at the doors. We have to walk on through the doors of death. But what do we know is laid up for us? Crown of life. And no one's going to take it away. Okay? So as we think about the book of Mark, we're going to see that Jesus was done wrong in about every which way you want to do a man wrong. But did he allow that to affect his mindset? Did he allow that to affect his attitude? And perhaps one of the greatest lessons we need to get in our minds is no matter what anybody does or says to you, see the big picture. Be thou faithful unto death, and you'll be all right. Okay? No matter what happens, it's going to be okay, ultimately. Lesson number 6, we would say, is pardon. That is release from the burden of sin. And Jesus was not really the first one to introduce the concept of pardon or forgiveness. Those are talked about really all through the Bible. However, Jesus took that concept and made it real. He made it actual. In other words, Jesus made pardon come alive. Back up to what we looked at in Mark chapter 2. Look at Mark 2 and verse number 5. When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. Sometimes I don't do it much anymore because I really am not interested in hearing what people have to say, if you want me to be blunt. Were there forgiveness of sins before the cross? Everybody says, no. And then I say, explain that. When were that man's sins forgiven? I'm not asking you because I know. You have to pick your poison. If you say that there were no sins forgiven before the cross, was this before the cross? Were this man's sins forgiven? You know, Jesus proved in this context by means of a miracle that the man's sins were forgiven. You do understand that, right? Just saying. We to some extent, run our mouths on things like that, and then we run into passages like this and go, well, he couldn't have been forgiven. Why not? Why not? By the way, this is not the only time Jesus did this. So when were the man's sins forgiven? If they weren't forgiven right there, then when were they? So what's my point? Be mindful about certain things that we might say. There were no forgiveness of sins before the cross. Okay, you're not going to have a whole lot of problem for me. You're just going to run into that. Then what do you have to do? Then watch, I'm making a point. Because of this preconceived idea, that affects the way I have to see this. And what do I have to do? I have to fit this to my preconceived idea. When the truth is, maybe we should turn loose of that preconceived idea. Fair? Then maybe we should take all those preconceived ideas. People call those baggage. Do you bring baggage to the Scriptures? Shake your head like this, because you do. Do I bring baggage to the Scriptures? Shake your head like this, because I do. Okay? What do we have to learn to do? Drop the baggage. Receive with meekness the engrafted word. Say, okay, I'm going to get all my preconceived, whatever I thought I knew, all these ideas in my mind, set it to the side and say, what does this text say? What does this text teach? Because if we struggle with Mark 2:5, we're really going to struggle with Mark 16:16. Do you see how this concept, to some extent, let me tell you why it's somewhat irrelevant. All of us live way on the other side of the cross. Okay, so it has no direct application to us, but we'll get in all types of red-faced discussions, high blood pressure, tense discussions about people that are dead and gone. This guy's dead and gone. And you do understand. So we get into, what about Cornelius and his household? They're dead and gone, and we're way on the other side of that. So we get into these discussions about people that are dead and gone. And it doesn't really, were there forgiveness of sins before the cross? What does it matter to you and me? We're so far on the other side of the cross. What does it matter? You stop to think about that? What really changes one way or another for you and for me? What really changes, whether it was or wasn't? Sometimes we need to have the wisdom to say, let that go. Because what's it going to change for you and me? Because we're way on the other side of the cross. And on the other side of the cross, Jesus is not going to come up to anybody. Nobody's going to lower a man down through the roof. And Jesus is going to walk over there and say, son, thy sins. It's not going to see that. It's already happened. Go to Mark 11. Jesus took this concept and made it real, actual. He made it come alive. Notice what he says in Mark 11, 25 and 26. When you stand praying, notice the posture of prayer is not bound. If you stand praying, fine. If you want to kneel praying, fine. If you want to lay down on your bed and pray, fine. All that's fine. So it's okay to stand praying, right? When you stand praying, forgive. What's it mean to forgive? It means to send away. In a practical sense, it means I may not forget it, but I don't dwell on it. Okay? So when I look at somebody, I don't think, they stole from me. They lied to me. That's not what you think about. You think about, we're done, we're good. What they did wrong, they made right, and drop it. Right? When you stand praying, forgive. If you have aught against any, that. What's the purpose? Why do I need to forgive? That your Father also, which is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. Do you see that the concept of pardon, to some extent, is connected on my ability to forgive? I need a little help from my Father. Do you? So what can I do? That means I need to be willing and able to forgive. What does it mean? Send it away. What does that mean? I forget it? No, it means you don't dwell on it. So much so that when you think about Brock or you think about whoever it was that did you wrong, you don't think about the wrong. You think about, man, he's made in the image of God. He's got a soul just like I got a soul, and we're all going to spend eternity somewhere, and I'd rather Brock go to heaven, wouldn't you? Oh, not hell. But notice there's a but. Verse 26, but if ye do not forgive, forgive who? If I have aught against any. That's the words used in the previous verse. But if ye do not forgive, neither will your Father which is in heaven forgive your trespasses. Ooh. I don't know that we talk about that aspect of pardon and forgiveness enough. We may say you need to be immersed in water for the remission of sin. I know, that's true. But there's something else connected with that. And Jesus is showing us here that to some extent, my pardon, my forgiveness is connected with how willing and able I am to forgive others. Well, what about, who do I need to forgive? If ye have aught, anything, against anyone. And then Jesus took this concept, and you look at Luke 17, 3 and 4. You know, if your brother trespasses against you, what's step number one? Rebuke him. It doesn't say get on the horn and say, let me tell you what Brock just did to me. I know that man was sorry. Right? That's nothing. That may be what we do, but that's nothing what Jesus taught. Nothing like what Jesus taught at all. Lesson number 7 is peace. Peace. Let's look at Mark 10. What do you mean by peace? We mean inner calm and tranquility, the easiness of mind that no matter what happens to me today, I'm in Christ and faithful, and it's going to be all right. It's going to be okay. Now, Jesus came so that all humanity has the opportunity, number one, to make peace with God by Jesus giving his life as a ransom for many. Again, Mark 10:45. It's also true that Jesus came so that we could have peace one with another. Mark 9 and verse 50. So everyone who sinned even one time must discover how to make peace with the Godhead as soon as possible. You know, the invitation is still open. Someone read Mark 10, verses 13 to 16. Good. Thank you. What do you see there? You know, even well-meaning people. Look at it. And they brought young children to him that he should touch them, and his disciples, well-meaning people. Well-meaning people. What did they do? Get away. You ain't got no business up here around Jesus. What's wrong with you? Get them little children out of here. Right? Did they mean well? Of course. I mean, give them the benefit of the doubt. They meant well, but what are they doing? They're hindering people from coming to Jesus. Stop. That's simplified. That's what it is. You can't come to Jesus. Now, when Jesus saw it, how did he react to it? What are you fellas thinking? Are you kidding me? The text says he was much displeased. How much is much? More than a little. And notice what he said. Come on, let him go. Send him up here. Do you see that some people are still trying to come to Jesus for peace? Let them come. But they got to come the way that Jesus tells them to come. Okay? They want to just run up any old way. You've got to come through Mark 16:16. You got to come through Acts 2:38. You know, I mean, that's the invitation never closes, but the offer for peace is extended to whoever will. Stay in that chapter, but notice verses 28 to 31. What does it say? Good. Thank you. What do you see there? Have you lived that yet? Have you lived that yet? Has the gospel cost you anything? You keep on and watch and see. But what's the promise? It's going to cost you something. But what's the promise? Look at verse 30. But he shall receive 100-fold. When and where? When? Where? Now is when. Where? In this time. Lord will take care of you here. Doesn't that give you a sense of peace? When you stop and think about it, hadn't God taken care of you on this side? We know He's going to take care of us on the other side if we're faithful unto death. But stop and think. Do we have it that bad on this side? Is it that bad? It's really not, is it? But notice there's another modifier there. Now in this time, houses and brethren and sisters and mothers and children and lands, but there's a with. What comes with this? With. So there's going to be some persecutions. Are you shocked? Are you surprised? Surely not. Because why? They did the Lord that way, they'll do us that way. What's the point? Peace. When we all decide to live for something bigger than self, that is to live for Jesus Christ, according to the gospel of Christ, by being faithful members of the church of Christ, everything else falls into place. And we can have that tranquility, that easiness of mind, that it's okay. And what's not okay today, just keep living, and it will subside. And even if it doesn't, glory awaits the faithful on the other side. Now, we're done with our introduction to Mark, and Lord willing, next time we will dive into the text of Mark 1, chapter 1, and we will go through until we finish the book. I will try to have some papers at the back. I've thought about how to do this, and I'm going to try and have some papers in the back with some special studies on there. That way we hopefully can go through the text pretty quickly. And what I anticipate to be some difficult things, I'm going to give you a pretty thorough set of notes. That way you can look at it, consider it, and study it on your own. And before I forget, we're going to start book number 2, lesson number 2 today. They're at the back, so you may want to pick those up after we dismiss with prayer. Everybody all right? Everybody good? All right. Let's bow. Our kind, merciful, gracious, and loving Heavenly Father,